Space is enormous and may be home to many ancient civilizations besides ours. What do we do if we realize we are no longer alone? And it turns out they are not coming here as friends. One day you wake up and the news is telling us unequivocally that aliens have arrived, their intent unclear. The next day, their ships are landing, and their intent has become very clear as as the holes their disintegration rays are leaving in buildings. We've been invaded by aliens. Now what? Of course, the long-standing piece of channel advice on aliens attacking is to get on your knees and pray, because that's got a better chance of working than any actual defense we might mount. And if it doesn't work, it leaves you well positioned to either kiss your butt goodbye or welcome our new alien overlords. But how true is that? Today we're going to ask what we might do if aliens invaded, and that depends a lot on what their motivation is. Why have they invaded and what is their goal? Some of these scenarios give us better chances than others. We'll explore why aliens might invade, and even consider the possibility that they might already have invaded. Now, I want to say up front, since this episode is a quasi-sequel to last year's Aliens Have Contacted Us, Now What episode, where some folks were confused, that while we can discuss the idea that this may already have occurred, I, for one, do not think it has. In fact, I'm very dubious that there are any alien civilizations inside our entire supercluster of galaxies, let alone hostile and invasive sorts, within our corner of the galaxy. One of the strongest pieces of evidence we present in that discussion of the Fermi paradox is that our not having been invaded any time in the last few billion years is a pretty good indicator that nobody is so inclined. Either they don't want to, or they don't exist. And it's easier for me to believe the latter. Earth, sitting there ripe for the plucking for billions of years, before anything even vaguely intelligent arose on it, probably did not represent a serious moral quandary for every civilization that arose in all the incarnations they would presumably have during such a time span. How many millions of civilizations, each experiencing millions of years of existence and change, would have had to take a pass on claiming our pale blue dot? On the flip side, there's not much motivation to claim Earth beyond it being one more useful planet, and many of the things that make it useful also make it more valuable and intact. An alien civilization doesn't have much reason to sack Earth for its mineral resources. The galaxy is full of easier planets to mine, not to mention asteroids and moons that are even simpler to exploit. And we know they're not simply devouring every star system and planet in their wake, because we would see massive black voids in the night sky where stars have been enclosed in Dyson spheres or dismantled for resources. Stars have far more of every metal than all their planets combined, and can even fuel their own thermomagnetic mining by starlifting. This is fundamentally the Dyson dilemma of the Fermi paradox, not why we can't see alien civilizations around other stars, but rather why we can see any stars at all. If advanced civilizations were common, we might expect them to surround stars with artificial worlds and power collectors, rendering those stars invisible. While there are some reasons why civilization might not pursue this Kardashev-scale approach to colonizing the galaxy, none of them provide a compelling justification to bother with alien planets for material resources. It would be like walking past a pile of $100 bills to bust open a piggy bank full of pennies. Fundamentally, for someone to come to Earth to collect gold, water, or some similar resource would be like driving past several fertile river valleys to harvest one modest oasis while leaving the rest untouched. Of course, they might simply hate all other life forms besides their own, but if that were the case, they wouldn't have waited until we became intelligent. Earth's presence as a life-bearing planet would have been astronomically obvious to anyone with good telescopes for at least a billion years. Moreover, the skill and effort required to build and maintain those telescopes would be trivial compared to creating and deploying an invasion fleet. So we can reasonably assume that any xenocidal aliens have likely known about Earth for nearly all of its history, except perhaps the first few thousand years after they reached our current technological level, a point we ourselves might reach within a century or two. It's not really an advanced technology thing, though more always helps, it's just having enough space development to build and maintain very large telescopes there. Even if they only load intelligence, they would recognize that this shortens their window of opportunity before they might need to act to avoid facing a major fight. They would likely leave monitors around inhabited worlds, or occasionally send probes to check for updates, such as large-scale canals or farmland, which Earth has been prominently sporting for thousands of years now. Of course, they might actually relish a good fight, and be perfectly fine with allowing civilizations to reach modern technological levels to provide one. They could reason that such levels wouldn't allow for interstellar colonies, or if they did, those colonies would be relatively nearby, easily detectable, and straightforward to destroy. So more foes to fight, but without a risk of galactic infection from delaying too long. Given that advanced civilizations are likely not as motivated by personal survival and prosperity as we are, let alone our ancestors, who couldn't afford much long-range planning or existential contemplation of purpose and meaning, we can't entirely rule out alien motivations becoming highly arcane. They might believe they are the chosen people of the cosmos, and feel compelled to prove it on a more level playing field than simply nuking us from orbit. As we'll explore today, there's also unique things Earth possesses, such as its biology, human art, and culture, that aliens might desire and which could make the possibility of a conflict viable. Indeed, we might even encounter scenarios where aliens are nominally the good guys, arriving to rescue us, or at least morally gray, resulting in humans fighting humans, with pro-alien and anti-alien factions being the main issue. Thus, one possible response to aliens invading might be to fight, not just as a matter of principle or as a courageous last stand before the dark ocean rolls over us, but because we might actually stand a chance. Of course, if you're going to fight, it helps to have some solid strategy. This brings us to the first rule of warfare, which I learned during my time as a grunt in the US Army, back during the war. It was shared to me by many sergeants and saved my life or sanity more than once. However, as it turned out, while each of my sergeants made sure to tell me what the most important thing in battle was, I had quite a few over the years, most of them excellent and battle-hardened. Each had their own pearls of wisdom, and they really are, too. Each piece of advice is appropriate in the right circumstances, and since the nature of war is always fluid and changing, it makes sense that its rules would shift as well. Over the years, I've shared them in various episodes, usually scrubbed of the four-letter words that tend to be mixed in at the time, and collected some more. The one that tops the list as the first rule of warfare is that if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck. And recalling those folks from long ago, who see themselves as the chosen of the cosmos, and obliged to prove it, we do have to acknowledge that there's always an overarching mission which often takes precedence over personal survival. Modern doctrine leans heavily on the idea that your cause is just and your enemy's is not, or they wouldn't be at war with a free and democratic nation. So in theory, it's perfectly fine to shoot your enemy in the back, or bomb their camp while they're sleeping, since you are not trying to prove you're a better fighter. This same sort of ethos tends to also make you weak after war, as you can't root out the rebels and guerrillas by any means necessary. The shiny crown of enlightenment tends to slip off your head when bent over to tighten the thumbscrews on rebels. We do not want to go assuming any alien we encounter is without ethics and rules. Keeping some highly motivated galactic expansion going on almost requires a civilization with some serious doctrine to bind them together and keep them motivated on what might be century-long deployments. They may be very into the need to personally prove themselves in combat, or strategic superiority, or they may have some moral doctrine that makes it viable to run real insurgencies, or utilize guerrilla tactics that a more ruthless enemy might deal with by nuking a city. Or they might have a great deal of honor and ritual for handling personal disagreements, challenge, and competition amongst their own ranks, but not feel it applies to dirty aliens, or the unenlightened ones anyway. They may actively add to their number from the conquered, especially among stellar empires or post-biologicals, race or species might mean very little. Speaking of guerrillas or insurgents, our first scenario assumes the aliens have already invaded and are here without our awareness. This might be because we ourselves are aliens, or perhaps they are distant descendants or creations, something we explored more in our episode on whether primitive humans might have been uplifted. If this were the case, they might be here simply to check up on us, or perhaps as initial scouts decide what measures, if any, are needed to bring us back into the fold, or under their thumb, or under their tentacle maybe. This brings up the first issue with secret alien invasions. If they're happening and all the UFO sightings are genuine, or even just some of them, then the ancient and advanced civilizations supposedly working subtly to influence or control us on Earth are terrible at it. When facing an alien invasion, the first question is, what do they want? But what if they don't want anything at all? What if they aren't truly conscious, just acting on automated protocols set in motion eons ago? This unsettling idea is the core of my latest exclusive episode, Post-Consciousness Civilizations. What if we discovered an alien world that looked vibrant and full of life, only to realize there was no one truly home? What if an invasion force arrived here, controlled by superintelligent strategists, and yet with no conscious mind strategizing? Could civilizations evolve beyond awareness and continue to expand, colonize, and even invade, without anyone actually being there? Find out more exclusively on Nebula, where you can watch all my episodes early and ad-free. You also gain access to all our monthly Nebula exclusives, along with an alien armada worth of top-notch content from other great creators like Real Engineering, Joe Scott, and The Silence Asylum, and check out other videos looking at the sorts of weapons we might fight an alien invasion with, like the insane engineering of the F-14 Tomcat. And for new Nebula subscribers, you can get access to guest passes. No personal information is required, no card info, and you can share your passion for Nebula with friends and family. Head over and sign up now to get Nebula for just $36 a year. That's 40% off with my link go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur to watch post-consciousness civilizations and start exploring the strangest frontiers of intelligence. Unless their specific aim is to expose us to numerous tangential sightings, slowly acclimating us to the idea of aliens without making it certain, so that we would not be overly shocked by their eventual, undeniable reveal, they sure do get caught a lot. Given how frequently we discuss alien sightings, often even broadcasting them on radio, something I've done personally on several radio shows, they should know we are onto them by now and very suspicious. This raises the question, why do these ancient and advanced aliens keep doing it? Even if their goal is to gradually get us used to their presence, surely they could approach it in a way less likely to cause widespread fear and mistrust. Indeed, their methods almost guarantee that many people will at best remain skeptical of their intentions, and at worst, be openly hostile. This violates the first rule of warfare after all: do not provide your enemies with recruiting material. If it turns out they are fairly benevolent and have interfered with us mostly in positive ways, or at least with good intentions, many of us might forgive their manipulation. But that's a much harder sell after multiple generations of obscure sightings and shadowy interferences, and possibly abductions. A straightforward approach like landing and saying, "Sorry for the secrecy, we want to get to know you better before introducing ourselves," might have worked initially. However, that line of reasoning won't sit well when alien sightings have been commonplace for decades or centuries, and when the Resistance decides to start putting out recruiting posters and memes, expect an alien doing a proctological exam on an unwilling human to pop up everywhere. Now, sticking with the covert scenario for the moment, if aliens are here and secretly in control, we should probably assume they can't, or won't, use mass brainwashing technologies or similar methods. Otherwise, they could dispense with the problematic secrecy and run things openly. If that's the case, their ability to act as puppet masters is likely limited. This could simply be a matter of numbers if they are actually alien brain parasites, as seen in science fiction like Robert Heinlein's 1951 classic The Puppet Masters, where the invaders are mind-controlling slugs, or The Goa'uld from Stargate, where the parasites are more serpent-like. In either case, they can only control a limited number of hosts and probably rely on some willing accomplices who may not be entirely loyal or even necessarily evil. They would need to be somewhat constrained in what they tried, and if they are acting under limits, they can be fought. Additionally, they wouldn't have much reason to wander around generating UFO sightings. Against these kinds of covert invaders, your main goal would be to obtain graphic evidence of their existence and share it with the public, something that's much easier to do in the modern age. Another possible reason for their secrecy could be the presence of other alien factions. They might have their own enemies, potentially from within their own species or government. Interstellar space doesn't easily lend itself to long-term cohesion, and if one alien race evolved within 100 light-years of us, sharing a region of space with us which would appear as just a single tiny pixel on a galactic map on your computer or phone, it's statistically likely that others evolved nearby too. The galaxy is an enormous place, and its volume grows exponentially with distance. If one alien civilization evolved within 100 light-years, on average, 8 others might exist in a volume twice as wide, 200 light-year radius. 1,000 could exist in a region just 10 times as wide, 1,000 light-year radius. Even this larger volume, containing potentially thousands of civilizations, would still appear as only a small dot on your galactic map. This dot would encompass somewhere in the vicinity of 1 million stars, most with planets, leaving plenty of room for rivalries, even within a single unified empire. In fact, you'll likely find room for rivalries and jealousies even within the same invasion force on one little pale blue dot of a planet. History offers countless examples of internal conflict, and while alien minds might have very different psychologies, competition for supremacy and resources is something we would expect to see on any world where life evolved in a Darwinian environment. If they made it to space, they are either the victors standing atop a billion-year-deep pile of skulls, as we are, or they're the ones who overthrew them, perhaps advanced AIs, androids, or genetically enhanced beings that replace their creators, as something might one day replace us. And if they are prone to conquest, whether overt or covert, it's unlikely they would be super friendly or non-competitive with each other either. Many a defeat has been snatched from the jaws of victory by infighting, or fallen apart shortly after the victory party over debates for how to divide the spoils and honors. It is handy for the defenders that the first rule of warfare is that best friends make for their worst enemies. The key point here is that unless you're dealing with a unified hive mind, and maybe even then, once an invasion requires protracted operations, you gain the potential to fight back effectively. As powerful as the enemy may be compared to you, the wider battlefield isn't just you versus them. They likely have other adversaries to deal with besides you, or internal divisions that can cause one faction to exploit the failures of another. These divisions often create motivations to indirectly or directly assist you in causing those failures. This dynamic is why so many wars and conflicts in recent history have seen one side win every battle but effectively still lose the war. A side that is militarily and economically dominant with far more people, resources, and often even better-trained and motivated troops can still find itself unable to secure victory. It also means that the underdog can often rely on generous contributions in weapons, money, and intelligence from their enemy's rivals, at least as long as it benefits those rivals to provide support. This is the first rule of warfare, after all. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, at least for today. Rebel leaders are often wise to remember that their allies might not be entirely reliable. Beyond the concern of enemy infiltration, very few rebellions are composed solely of noble, heroic figures fighting against clear and unambiguous tyranny. Hyper-authoritarian regimes tend to be very effective at cracking down on crime, and much of that crime is often committed by genuinely bad actors, not just lovable rogues like Han Solo. This raises an important point. If aliens have invaded, it's worth making sure they really are the bad guys. On the flip side, you want to be wary of your new allies and recruits. They might be infiltrators, and even if they are not, if they or you aren't terribly ethical, today's friend can be tomorrow's enemy. That's the first rule of warfare, after all. Never hand someone a loaded gun unless you're sure who they're pointed at, and if they'll keep pointing it the way you want, or at least not at you. This also brings us back to motivations for invasions. These are notoriously difficult to make believable without being either incredibly contrived or deeply flawed, as many a sci-fi writer has discovered. Our original episode, Stupid Aliens, from 2016, focused largely on pointing out the illogical behaviors of many popular alien invaders in fiction. Today, let's look at some examples from well-known science fiction. Take the Martians from the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Their invasion was inspired by the popular idea of the time that Mars had canals and was a dying planet. The Martians invaded Earth because they needed our planet and its resources as a new home. However, this motivation doesn't hold up well under scrutiny. If they just needed more air and water, it would have been far easier to get those from many icy rocks with little or no gravity in the outer solar system. They famously lost because they were, in turn, invaded by Earth's microbes, succumbing to sickness and dying. While ironic, this is also illogical. Determining whether they could survive on Earth should have been a basic step, easily verified by sending scouts while they were building their invasion fleet. It's hard to imagine any advanced alien civilizations falling victim to such an oversight. While historical and metaphorical parallels exist, such as invading forces weakening due to disease, low morale, or even becoming sympathetic to the natives, it challenges the premise of why Martians, or any aliens, would try to take a biologically intact planet to colonize for themselves in the first place. As we discussed before, the answer lies in the immense value of a planetary ecosystem. An entire biosphere is a goldmine of unique genetic material and species, which aliens would likely value far more than just another rock among trillions they could mine for mundane raw materials. However, that very motivation strongly implies they also recognize the dangers of an alien ecosystem and can plan accordingly. The xenomorphs from the Alien franchise provide an interesting reverse case of this. In the films, they repeatedly become a threat only because some greedy corporation or government wants to study their unique and impressive biology. Honestly, it's unclear why they are so interested. If you want the equivalent of a land shark, something stupid and tough, you could easily build a simple robot with guns. Still, it highlights an example of why an alien race might be extremely protective of an ecology, even if they are otherwise unpleasant individuals with selfish motives. This stands in contrast to the movie Avatar, where humans invade seeking a unique material, unobtainium. It's unlikely that any inhabited planet would have a resource so uniquely valuable that was not explicitly tied to its ecosystem. For example, in Dune, the spice comes from the sandworms. Kill the worms and the spice disappears. If you're from a civilization skilled in science and logic, you'd likely assume there's a correlation between the environment and the abundance of that resource. You wouldn't risk damaging the ecosystem until it was under control and thoroughly studied. They may not have geese on their planet, but probably do have some equivalent parable for not killing the golden goose. Now, this assumes the aliens are scientifically capable and logical. Obviously, this is not the case for the xenomorphs, as they don't build spaceships or demonstrate advanced intelligence. However, it's worth noting that aliens don't need to be super intelligent to be a significant threat. If they are brilliant and hyperlogical, you are probably going to lose. Unlike in a lot of science fiction, superlogical aliens or machine minds are unlikely to be blindsided by you doing something too dumb for them to anticipate. They understand that the first rule of warfare is that you plan for everything. A basic strategic assumption is that your opponent will attempt something improbable or unexpected, not to be confused with stupid, and is roughly as smart as you. If they are vastly smarter, you are almost certain to lose, especially if they also already enjoy superior technology and numbers. If they are significantly dumber, you are almost certain to win, even if you make mistakes or miss opportunities. Overestimating your opponent might cause you to misjudge their plans, but your overall advantage will typically allow you to recover and adapt. You understand that the first rule of warfare is that no plan survives contact with the enemy, and are ready to react to the unexpected by simply giving yourself a lot of leeway to soak up problems and reposition yourself when you figure out how to handle the new threat. And so long as you have time to think, you will come up with something that works. Which is why uncommitted reserve forces are important, and is also why it's a good idea to keep the pressure on an opponent once you've knocked them off balance. They make fast and often bad decisions. Admittedly, sometimes that decision is to keep desperately fighting when common sense and a chance to catch their breath might make them pause to negotiate terms or outright surrender. The xenomorphs, for example, do eventually invade Earth at the end of the fourth film, Alien Resurrection. While they are dangerous and crafty, they are ultimately not very intelligent, and they can be defeated in any protracted combat. Intelligence, while not always a necessity in quick and brutal skirmishes, becomes a critical factor in prolonged engagements or wars. Brains win in the long run. Determination helps too. A lot of times you can win just by wanting it more than the other guys and stubbornly keeping at it. The Borg from Star Trek would seem like a perfect example of an unstoppable force. They are a unified hive mind of allegedly great intelligence and absolute determination. Their signature phrase, "resistance is futile," would be very fitting if they were not often written as incredibly stupid. Unfortunately, they suffer in the franchise from what's called villain decay, where the enemy grows progressively less competent and easier to defeat, even while being described as nigh invincible. The fact that they keep losing makes it hard for audiences to take their supposed invulnerability and terror-inducing nature seriously. Show don't tell is important for establishing an enemy as tough in fiction, which is why Worf is always getting beat up by the villain of the week in Star Trek The Next Generation. The Borg also represent an interesting motivation for invasion: assimilation. Initially, this is framed as a drive to absorb the best traits of other species and civilizations, allowing them to adapt, learn, and improve. This is often the hallmark of truly terrifying opponents, those who can lose but come back smarter and tougher each time. The Dread Empire from the series of that name by Glenn Cook, or the Shanshan from Wheel of Time both take that approach. It's also a plausible reason for aliens to invade planets. The Borg are not shown dismantling planets or enveloping stars in Dyson swarms, nor are they harvesting random animals like whales or cockroaches. Instead, their resource is other technological civilizations. The Borg often leave survivors, and it makes sense. they don't seem particularly concerned about wiping out potential future enemies root and stem, because that root and stem might grow more civilizations with interesting new aspects, skills, or technologies. If remnants of a civilization escape and eventually grow strong enough to attack them again, seeking vengeance, it simply means a new and improved civilization has arisen, and the Borg don't need to expend resources to seek out that civilization. They'll come to the Borg willingly, drawn by vengeance, and fly right into the mouth of the Harvestor. Worse, it's quite possible that if faced by a truly superior enemy, they might not object to being harvested, believing their own resistance was futile and wrong. I'm not quite sure how you would deal with an invasion like this, but the enemy is seeking to harvest you for your talents and unique aspects. I don't really see that ending in a Borg-like hive mind. Maybe a hive mind, but not one that treats its drones and worker bees as mindless and expendable, or not even expendable, practically without value. A lot of the time, aliens in science fiction show up simply to grow mindlessly. While this can work as a concept in sci-fi, it does not hold up logically. If something truly wanted to grow mindlessly, that's exactly what it would do, likely in ways that make it easier to counter. On the other hand, if it's intelligent but purely driven by growth, it's essentially identical to us, or to anything else we'd expect to arise from nature and evolution. This suggests their expansion would likely be cautious and determined, following paths of least resistance, or at least minimal resistance. Such a species would resemble what's often referred to as a loud or grabby alien under the Dyson dilemma. This means they would be detectable by their rapid and aggressive expansion, making it highly improbable that any such species exists in our immediate region of the galaxy. The odds of one having started close enough to us in both time and space to remain undetected are astronomically low, worse than winning the lottery. Moreover, unless the species has some means of instantaneous communication, violating known physics, it would have to develop at least a minimal concept of diplomacy. Even if it didn't originate as a social species, it would eventually need to interact with its own divergent offshoots. These offshoots are unlikely to act seamlessly and selflessly with one another, much like a collection of amoebas divided from a single original organism wouldn't necessarily cooperate. This gets explored with the alien superintelligence Morning Light Mountain in Peter Hamilton's excellent Commonwealth saga. This opens up the possibility that if you've been invaded, you might have unexpected allies to call upon, other factions or splinters of the alien species that don't see eye to eye with their counterparts. At a certain point, these organisms don't have a motivation for further expansion either. If they are intelligent, they know that sending out a new colony in a given direction just replaces a previously empty border with a new neighbor who has the same basic and competing motives that it has. Survival of the species is often very at odds with personal survival, and many of the traits that assist with that would never arise the organism were intelligently operating strictly for its own survival as its peak priority, which critters that are nigh immortal from technological enhancement might be able to focus on. On the other hand, aliens might not care much about species at all, placing it as a distant priority behind personal survival, or more importantly, cultural ideological survival. In science fiction, we often see hybrid species of aliens and humans presented as the goal of the invaders, likely as a way to cut down on makeup and costume budgets. This need not always be a hostile act either, as sci-fi frequently portrays aliens raised in human culture, married to humans, or the half-human offsprings of such unions, like Spock or Deanna Troi from Star Trek. As we've discussed elsewhere, such hybrids are unlikely to occur naturally unless the aliens are only alien in the sense that they share a common origin with humans, such as having lived on the same homeworld hundreds of thousands of years ago, followed by significant mutation or genetic engineering. True aliens are unlikely to share much biological compatibility with us, beyond the basic similarity of being an organism with a digestive tract, a mouth, and some exit ports, around which additional organs evolved to keep that mouth full of food and avoid getting killed. Somewhere along the evolutionary line, a more sophisticated method of reproduction might have developed beyond divide in two, but it's highly improbable that it would interest a member of another species, barring some truly oddball preferences, even by Rule 34 standards. That said, alien empires might number their populations in the quadrillions or more, meaning even the 1 in a million oddball who's fascinated by alien physiology, however grotesque, could be numerous enough to form their own colony, or invasion force. More importantly, while nature might discourage interspecies compatibility, technology opens the door to possibilities that shouldn't necessarily happen but can. With advanced genetic or synthetic techniques, you could mix two creatures whose DNA is farther apart than ours is from a tree, or even mix entities that don't use DNA at all. Aliens might consider this a logical approach to colonizing new worlds, using what we call bioforming, adapting themselves to the planet, rather than terraforming, which involves adapting the planet to suit their existing biology. As we've often noted, colonization likely involves a mix of the two approaches. For instance, a species might thicken a planet's atmosphere so it's easier to breathe, while also tweaking their own biology through natural selection, genetic engineering, or cybernetics to handle thinner air. This would result in a compromise, with ongoing debates among the colonists about whether to further adapt themselves, the planet, or both, which would likely lead to generational shifts in approach, too. Alien invasions might follow a similar path. Invaders may choose to adapt to an existing planetary ecology to preserve it, possibly using android bodies or transforming themselves into cloned human forms. This might even be their standard approach to galactic expansion. In fact, an alien stuffed into a human body might come from a planet that was itself conquered in this way 1,000 years earlier. Such an alien could inform us that it doesn't know where its original homeworld was or what its species originally looked like, as those details were intentionally erased, either as a matter of principle, equality among all species, security, or both. You'll notice I've repeatedly implied that alien invaders may not necessarily be evil, or might even arrive in a way that's arguably not an invasion at all. History offers us plenty of examples of such scenarios. I tend to be skeptical about any civilization lasting long without some overarching purpose that gives its members a sense of value and meaning in their lives. This doesn't have to be a single shared purpose, but it generally needs to exist in some form. For a classical invasion, the only reason to proceed without some sort of moral justification is material profit, loot, or land, but that logic doesn't work here. The Dyson dilemma already explains why it wouldn't be about land. It's so much easier to build a fleet of space habitats within an existing solar system than to colonize another, let alone invade it. And yet no one appears to be doing that either, because such actions would leave obvious and unmistakable signs, loud alien fingerprints, that we would have detected by now. As for loot, the only truly unique thing Earth offers are DNA codes or individual pieces of art, but those can all be copied. The only motivation for taking them in their original form would be the value placed on authenticity, first edition prints of comic books, original paintings, or other one-of-a-kind items that might hold sentimental or cultural significance to the invaders. But there's no guarantee that such things would motivate their forces. Without the prospect of land or loot, you need to pay your soldiers in coin of the spirit, ideological or cultural purpose. That might be feasible in a post-scarcity economy of an advanced civilization. It's also possible that such a civilization is driven by excitement or entertainment, with their military composed of individuals who find up-and-close personal combat exhilarating. Ironically, this could mean you might initially fare quite well against them, possibly for decades, using ambushes and guerrilla warfare. After all, that's what they came for, and the reality could be that their infiltrators are only sneaking into your organization to offer genuine tactical advice to prolong their fun. They might even be effectively unkillable. Post-humans, for instance, could be nuke-proof if they are merely controlling sophisticated androids or they have their consciousness backed up on a hard drive somewhere in orbit. This might be a winning strategy anyway, given that you have time to improve and develop counter-technologies and counter-strategies, which they might be entirely fine with. They might view this as a great way to get converts, or an amusing way for their soldiers and your rebels to occupy themselves, while the bureaucrats were busy rebuilding your civilization in their own image, or an adapted local hybrid. Alien psychology is likely to be both Darwinian-based at its core and built on some logic, thus overlaps us in some things, but is still very likely to be really weird and alien. They might view fights to the death as a practical form of population control for themselves and others, announcing it with the same casual attitude we use to justify letting little kids wrestle a bit. Alternatively, they might nuke entire cities just to eliminate one rebel, only to resurrect everyone in new bodies afterward to continue their lives, stand trial, or undergo rehabilitation. It's an insane waste of resources by our standards, but for them, it could be a matter of principle. Losing a week to be regrown in a vat from a mind copy might not bother a decent citizen, in their eyes, any more than being selected for jury duty does for us. Weird, but plausible. Again, aliens are likely to be alien. However, for a civilization paying in a more conventional coin to spirit, a good cause in the eyes of their soldiers, to engage in a literal ground invasion we could conceivably fight and win seems implausible. If their intent was purely hostile, they wouldn't send ground forces. They'd use a few billion megatons of relativistic kill missiles, or trillions of autonomous mortar bots capable of firing machine guns with pinpoint accuracy, landing every bullet in a target's head from a mile away. They could clean the whole planet of every human without scratching any other organism if they wanted, so that the only damage to the planet was done by us in a desperate defense. So odds are good if they are here to fight us and not immediately wipe the floor with us that while a fight might be doable, we probably do want to ask if it is necessary. Their idea of conquest might be that we get advanced energy and medical technology, but have to pay a 2% tax to the overlord of Vega Prime, and every 73rd day at noon, everyone is expected to stop, look toward Vega, and give thanks to the overlord. You may want to ponder if that's really a hill you want to die on. That's the first rule of warfare after all. Pick your battles wisely, be smart enough not to start stupid fights. The odds are good that the aliens show up in a way that gives us a fighting chance. They might also be something we can live with. Time has a way of leveling the playing field. A civilization that had a massive technological and strategic advantage a century ago might still be stronger, but likely by degrees rather than orders of magnitude. On the other hand, extinction might be preferable to, say, becoming human cattle for some race of sadistic alien pirates who could clone meat and live in virtual realities but prefer to make real thinking and feeling creatures suffer for their amusement. I tend to believe the universe isn't that dark a place. If alien invaders do show up, the first question of "now what?" should probably be followed by asking, can we live with it? The answer might turn out to be no for many reasons. However, if coexistence is possible, time may allow us to better position ourselves, whether to fight them later or establish a more peaceful equilibrium. Realistically, this only applies to the relative here and now. 100,000 years in the future, humanity might have spread amongst the stars, alongside our mutant offspring and artificial creations. In such a scenario, we could easily face an enemy, whether genuine aliens from a distant part of the galaxy, or something truly bizarre in form and mind that arose on the fringes of human settlement. You may have decades or even centuries of fighting them war to war in 1,000 battlefronts with shifting alliances at home and abroad. These entities might even return to us with human or near-human vanguards, converts, collaborators, or captives taken from the wedge they were driving through human space toward Earth. In that case, the battlefield might be a lot more level, and you will have had centuries to fortify your home system, in which case, the answer to the question of aliens have invaded, now what, is a lot easier to answer. You open fire.